They're coming after you. They want your head. Your blood is boiling and your heart is leaping out of your chest. You run faster than you ever have before, but it's not fast enough. Hoping to veer them off course, you dart into an alleyway, only to find yourself at a dead end. You see the silhouette of the assassins turn the corner. There's nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. As they approach, they pull out their blades. You know what's coming. This is the end of your life. Suddenly, in a cold sweat, you jolt awake. With your heart still pounding, you breathe a sigh of relief. It was just a dream, thank God. As your everyday, self-conscious mind continues to confirm its state, you start to calm down. You go about your day, and soon enough, you forget the dream ever happened. Think of the sleeping dream, the subconscious, as the first layer of reality, and everyday human consciousness, the self-conscious mind, as the second layer. Now I want you to open your mind to the possibility that there is an even higher third layer of reality, the superconscious, in which you become so conscious that you would view everyday human life as like a dream. Well, this third layer exists, and it is precisely what the essence of spiritual awakening is pointing towards. And before I get into it, just know this is my understanding of spiritual awakening. Don't just believe everything I say. Consider this video a transmission and allow yourself to be moved in whatever way you feel called to within this transmission. So yes, I know this term, spiritual awakening. It's a rather vague and loose term when used in like a colloquial context. One person might label the discovery of their life purpose as a spiritual awakening. Another might use the term to describe a breakthrough that they might have had in a therapeutic setting, while someone else might refer to this very high transcendent meditation experience as like their spiritual awakening. And the way I see it is that the reason people describe their spiritual awakenings differently is because awakening is not a singular, one experience reveals all type of thing. Unlike the sudden transition from sleep to the waking mind, awakening to spirit may come in various gradations and degrees, and it's likely that you'll have numerous awakenings throughout your lifetime, with each one yielding a deeper understanding of self. And while everyone may experience and describe a different facet or flavor of this higher reality, the path follows a similar trajectory for all people. And this trajectory is the expansion of consciousness to incorporate more and more of reality in its love, acceptance, and embrace. And the eventual result, the transcendent part of this, which people talk about, is expansion of consciousness beyond the everyday ego mind, the human identity, which believes it is separate from everyone and everything else. And through this transcendence, the inherent oneness of all things is revealed. You realize your ultimate identity is not your body, your thoughts, and your emotions, but you're actually infinite. You are the universe itself, God itself, life itself, divinity itself. And this is not just some hippie, airy-fairy idea either. There's certainly groups of people who can turn it into that. But this is not just something you tell yourself or you take as concept. Don't take this as a concept. Don't turn this into an intellectual mental masturbation session. I want you to open your mind to the possibility that you can have a direct conscious experience in which the boundary between your sense of self, your body, thoughts, emotions, and the outer world, it sort of melts or merges into one essence, and your sense of being expands infinitely in all directions. And let's contemplate what that would be like. Let's say you're in the superconscious mind. If you're in the superconscious mind, the mountain that you see in the distance, the cars that are bustling on the street, and the people that are walking on the sidewalk, well, they would all be experienced as you in the same way. The chatter of your mind, the emotions you feel, and the sensations of your body are experienced as you. Really think about that for a second. Because your sense of self is all-encompassing, there would be no mental identification with parts of reality being you and other parts being not you. Hold the possibility in your mind that you only made that distinction because you are biased towards your survival, and that there's not any hard truth to certain things being you and certain things being not you. It's all an arbitrary distinction that you make in your mind. So when you're in the superconscious mind, like I said, the mountains, the cars, the people on the sidewalks, thoughts, emotions, and impulses, they're all experienced as equally you. And now that your sense of self is infinite, It's no longer fused to the body, the thoughts, the emotions, and the feelings, the ego. You are awake. You are awake to the fact that you are the entire universe. You are source. You are infinite consciousness now experiencing itself as a human. In this state, you would have no preference for things being one way rather than another way. For all bias is a result of a finite identity that relies on its desire, attachment, and fixation on outcome in order to experience satisfaction. And when you have no bias, you can love everyone, everything completely equally. That's what unconditional love is. When you have no bias, you can be authentically who you are because you are not repressing, denying, or keeping any aspects of yourself from conscious experience. When you have no bias, you cannot suffer because you only suffer when reality is at odds with your bias, your attachment, your desires, and so on. So this suffering, this sorrow, the dissatisfaction with life, well, it all came about because you believe that the human form is all that you were. And now in moving from the self-conscious mind into the superconscious mind, you realize your ultimate identity is far beyond that of a human being. Now the time in which your sense of self was fused to the ego, well, now it feels like a dream because now it's radiantly obvious that you are one with all, you are everyone and everything. There is no one doing anything. There's just the universe. There's just life arising. There's no doer. There's not even someone watching it. There is just the present moment. There's just oneness with the present moment. Reality is pure being. It's pure isness. There's no distinction between an entity here and something else out there. It's all one. But then, after experiencing this, you fall back asleep into the self-conscious mind and you are left wondering what the hell you just experienced. So I said earlier, the term spiritual awakening is a loose label that one uses to describe the expansion of their consciousness to incorporate larger and larger wholes of reality in its embrace. One might not have a full-blown realization, such as how I just attempted to describe earlier. And again, one might label a stepping into more authentic identity as awakening. Another could label it as making a career change that expresses a greater concern for all people. Another could label awakening as a realization from a profound psychedelic experience. But whatever the experience, a spiritual awakening, like I said, it's the expansion of consciousness beyond just the self-conscious ego mind. And as I previously emphasized, this is not a singular one experience describes and reveals all type of thing. I see it more as happening in degrees. On one occasion, you might awaken to one facet of this higher reality. On another occasion, you might awaken to another. One of my first, I guess you can call it awakenings, I guess you can call it. I mean, really, it was back when I was a baby, and I realized I'm not fused to my caretakers. I'm not fused to my mother and my father, and that I'm a distinct entity. And I don't remember that, and neither do you, but it's still an expansion of consciousness. And I feel okay to call it an awakening in that sense because it's natural development. We don't typically think of it like that. But of course, the more adult and more mature realizations are what we usually call awakening. For me, when I was a teenager, the realization that identity is fluid and groundless, and that identity is something that I have and I inhabit, and that there's actually an observer behind all of it, and that this identity is not something I am absolutely. Well, that was absolutely huge for me, and I would say it was an awakening because my consciousness was no longer fused to these stories, these narratives that were making me suffer. And, then you get into the more deep spiritual stuff. Another awakening revealed to me that everything is one, everything is connected, and I am this oneness in a sense. I am, pure consciousness behind it all. I'm not just a separate entity that lives in the head, behind the eyes, that has this individual, separate free will. No, I'm one with everything. I am everything ultimately. And staying on this line of inquiry, it led me to the conclusion that the, entire universe is actually a singular, unified being. The universe is actually an organism of its own. And again, it all comes down to how we divide up and make distinctions within reality. And then later, I realized that consciousness, not physical material stuff like atoms, is actually the fundamental essence of reality. And again, like I said earlier, don't just believe what I say. Be skeptical. Be very, very, very skeptical of everything I say, but also be skeptical of skepticism too. But ultimately, go figure this out for yourself. I don't want to just have you believe me. But of course, despite all of this, the realizations of oneness, realizations of I'm not separate from anything at all, still I would always fall back into the ways of the self-conscious mind, because I'm just like everyone else, and that I'm very caught up in my own survival and my own human story. And so in my experience, awakening has been more of like a gradual oscillating process between self-conscious and superconscious, rather than this like all at once type of realization. It's like, oh, I realize the truth, I become enlightened, and now I'm enlightened forever. That's not how it works. And pretty much from everyone, that's not how it works. I noticed that in many people's first awakening experience, mine included, it can be so mind-boggling that you have no idea how to explain what you had just gone through. These initial awakening experiences, they're often called spiritual highs or peak experiences, because they are levels of consciousness that are so different and beyond our ordinary everyday experience. And these initial experiences that you have, they're often very short-lived. The ego is quick to jump in self-affirmance state. And again, this is not some happy, hippie, la-di-da-di-da type thing. The transition from self-conscious to superconscious can be absolutely brutal, because you're literally peeling away all of the aspects of your self-identity. And this transition can literally feel like death, because it's the letting go of everything you believe to be true about who you are. And when I first tasted this higher reality, I became depressed, scared, and confused for some time. And I actually briefly worried that I was psychotic, because it literally felt like I was out of my mind. And I was out of my mind in the sense I had an expansion of consciousness beyond, the everyday self-conscious ego mind. But really, that worry stemmed from a fear of not being in control and a fear of being different than everyone else. And it's important to emphasize that not every, spiritual awakening comes from a peak experience either. In fact, I would say a peak experience is just a tiny, tiny part of the entire process. And really, it's about the integration work that you do after. And as you continue to develop and do integration work, the peak experiences, they're experienced less like peaks, and you become more grounded in your newfound state. But I'll get into more of that in a second. But as I described in a YouTube video I posted over 3 years ago on my old channel, I said in that video that the process of awakening goes something like this, and I still stand by this to this day. So it's like 1, catalyst; 2, awakening; 3, dark night of the soul; 4, reintegration. And don't take these stages as rigid and absolute either. They're just generalizations. Don't take this too seriously. But getting into the catalyst, in order for one to awaken spiritually, there's virtually always some sort of catalyst that sets the process in motion. And usually this catalyst is some form of intense suffering that forces you to challenge your beliefs about yourself and about the world. I mean, suffering, it's the natural byproduct of consciousness inhabiting, a finite identity. So like when you believe yourself to be this form and not that form, you're going to suffer when reality is at odds with who you believe you are and who you want to be. And so your suffering, it reveals to you the limitations of your ego structures, and essentially demands it to expand. You're in this narrow ball, and it demands it to expand, or else you're going to continue to be in your misery, your disillusionment forever. And for me, while I have had a few catalysts in my life, probably the biggest one was when a high school ex-girlfriend suddenly and unexpectedly broke up with me. And I've talked about this a couple times in other videos, but I was completely broken and completely distraught by this breakup, and was sent into an almost year-long depression in which I viewed myself as mostly worthless. I idealized suicide at the worst of it, and I just became more and more disillusioned with the world. I started to ask the big questions again in life. I asked, is this really all there is? Is this what life is about? What's the point of even living with all? I really asked that. I was just wondering, why am I suffering so much? And through my suffering and my questioning, my rigid atheism and nihilism slowly gave way into a more open-minded, agnostic view. I became a more open-minded human in general, taking in perspectives from a wide variety of viewpoints. I developed an interest in psychology and philosophy, especially Buddhist ways of thought, and eventually I explored altered states of consciousness through things like lucid dreaming, meditation, weed, and psychedelics, and my exploration led me to having a very profound spiritual awakening in late 2019, which was about 2.5 years after this original breakup. And in these experiences, I felt that I grasped my true nature, and I really deepened my understanding of what consciousness in this universe really is and what's really going on here. So through this process, I became immensely grateful for all of the suffering I had experienced along the way, as well as the suffering I had yet to experience in my life. And I saw it all as a beautiful unfolding to create the beautiful human that I am today. And this same mechanism of suffering leading to expansion, it holds true on a collective level as well. All the suffering we have experienced as a species has led to the present day, which happens to be the most peaceful, well-off time in all of human history, by the way. And obviously it could be so much better. I'm not downplaying the not so great things about the world. We have a long way to go. And so the catalyst inevitably leads to some sort of expansion of consciousness in the individual. Very often we call it an awakening. And if you look at virtually like any enlightened being, I use that term very loosely. I don't really like the term too much. But their story almost always has some intense suffering. The Buddha walked his path after experiencing the brutality of life, the sheer brutality of life outside the palace that he had spent his entire life in. It kind of shocked him and made him want to think deeper about life and deepen his inquiry. And then Eckhart Tolle, if you know him, he's a spiritual teacher. He was about to kill himself before he had his awakening. And if we look at humanity as a whole, it was only a decade or so after the most brutal war in our species' history, I'm talking about World War II, that a new, more world-centric consciousness began to have a significant impact in the collective. And this consciousness was defined by togetherness and harmony. It sought to liberate humanity from greed and dogma, create equal opportunity for all, and strive to work towards the well-being of all people. And here I'm talking about like the 1960s counterculture movement. I'm talking about hippies, like climate change activists, social justice activists, multicultural movements, LGBTQ rights. If you're familiar with spiral dynamics, stage green on that model. And in a way, this was basically like a collective awakening, because awakening, like I said, it's the newfound realizations, awareness, and way of being that comes from consciousness inhabiting a more expanded state. So it should be obvious from what I'm saying that like higher consciousness, like this new consciousness that is described, it was a more world-centric consciousness. It emerges from the chaos and all the suffering that lower awareness takes, like egocentric, ethnocentric, nascent-centric, and all those lower states. It's like comes from a more finite density that's defined by, like I said, your race or your nation, and then that creates all these problems, and then it expands to this greater state that's a more world-centric awareness. But the thing is, this only happens through suffering, revealing the limitations of your ego structures, and that forces all of your beliefs, your identity, your ways of thinking, behaving, and relating to the world. That all comes into question. Anyway, the way I see it is that you can keep having deeper and deeper awakenings until your separate ego consciousness comes into full union with the universe, the one God. But I won't get too deep into that right now. But as consciousness expands, you're stepping into a new identity. You're stepping into a more expansive worldview and into a radically different paradigm of being a human being. And this comes with so many challenges, which inevitably leads to the dark night of the soul. And I love this quote: "There can be no rebirth without a dark night of the soul, a total annihilation of all that you believe in and thought that you were." Dark night of the soul is what occurs after an awakening, and it represents the shedding of the previous conceptual frameworks, belief system, behavior patterns, and relationships and habits that are no longer in alignment with the newfound awareness and realizations. And this process can be absolutely brutal, and for some it can last multiple years. For shedding an old identity, it's literally like death, because you're letting go of everything that you thought you were. The awakening has collapsed the house of cards that your ego has spent its entire existence creating, and now you must redefine and rebuild yourself again. So dark night of the soul, it's like a sort of spiritual surgery, but you don't have anesthetics to numb the pain. In fact, your rebirth is tied to how deeply you feel all of your suffering throughout this process. And like I said earlier, after a series of awakenings in late 2019, I was quite depressed, scared, and confused. For a short month afterwards, there was part of me that worried I was going psychotic, because my newfound realizations, it went beyond the logical, rational, dualistic scientific mind that had shaped me and the world so strongly up to that point. And as I gradually began to realize that what I had experienced was in fact a spiritual awakening and not a psychosis, I knew that it would be impossible to live a quote-unquote normal life and fit in with everyone. I realized that I would have to let go of many friends I had made up to that point. I wouldn't really be living a life of the status quo. I would be viewed as out there, weird, wacky, or even insane by many people, and that I would probably experience a lot of loneliness because not many people would understand me. And I also knew that creating a career in alignment with this stuff without compromising my integrity, well, that wouldn't be an easy task. And it's been a very difficult task. This is very hard for me to cope with initially, and I had thought, why me? Why does this have to happen to me? I don't want this. Truth is too scary. The dark night of the soul brought a lot of nihilism back into my consciousness. While yes, I had realized my ultimate identity is not Wyeth, but rather one with all, I was thinking, so what? Why does this knowing even matter? I'm just going to die one day anyway. What's the point? Yet I knew deep down that this was a perfect unfolding. This was my ego putting up defenses in response to its inevitable annihilation. And eventually, through time and doing what I felt is right, I stopped being in so much pain after these newfound realizations, and I felt myself to be a completely new person. And so to reintegrate yourself, one of the most crucial aspects of Dark Night of the Soul is to fully feel everything you are experiencing, because the ego wants to protect us from pain. Its natural tendency may be to deny and to distract itself from what is happening. And so during this time, you're going to be drawn to things like scrolling social media, watching TV, doing drugs, doing alcohols, maybe a certain relationship that distracts you, or really anything else that takes your attention away from the work that deep down needs to be done. And so any activity that brings you into direct contact with your feelings, emotions, bodily states, and intuition is going to be your best friend during Dark Night of the Soul. And these are things like, stream of consciousness writing, doing art, talking about painting, drawing, writing, anything that brings to the surface, talking about meditation, spending time in nature, following what naturally elicits excitement out of you, following curiosity, following your heart, going to therapy would help a lot, hiring a life coach, doing substances with the intention to fully experience and be yourself. Be very careful with that one. That can be a slippery slope, but it can also be very beneficial. Hanging out with new people that resonate with you and taking new perspectives through books, podcasts, YouTube videos, whatever resonates with you and is really getting you in your experience and having you fully feel. But ultimately, though, your heart knows the way. And in my experience, if you lean into your intuition and are doing what you feel is the right thing at the end of the day, you will not be led astray. And sometimes you really just have to do the hard thing and leave that job, leave that old life behind, leave that relationship, because it is not in alignment with who you truly are right now. Trust the process and accept yourself for where you are at, because life is going to lead you to the next insight, which is going to lead you to the next step that needs to be taken. And through time of continually doing this, you're going to be further and further established in your new identity, and you will look back on your old previous self and view it as literally like a previous life, almost as like a dream. This is how I feel about my prior self. Long gone are the thoughts of, why me? I don't want to do this. This is too scary. The truth is too scary. This is too much. Now I have more appreciation than ever for how life has unfolded. So much appreciation for all of my hardships. I'm happier than ever to be alive. And I have never loved and accepted myself and the world more than I do right now. Of course, like anyone, a lot of work to do on my part and things to integrate, but this oscillation between insight, dark night of the soul, and integration is happening within you all of the time, on both a micro and a macro scale. For me, in a sense, it was kind of like a mini dark night of the soul when I first became a life coach. This triggered all sorts of reactions from my ego, thinking I'm not good enough. Why would anyone trust me? I'm not wise enough. My mind would think like that. And during this process, I just allowed myself to fully sit with these feelings. They're there for a reason, and rather than just shove them away and barrel forward like my prior self would have done, I really deeply listened. And I knew that to integrate this new aspect of my identity into my way of being in a healthy manner, I just had to build confidence and keep picking on clients and building my skills and learning and keep going and practicing the skills in day-to-day life. And I already feel so much better about it as I've taken on more clients and built my skills. But, typically, when we talk about dark night of the soul, it refers to like paradigm shattering realizations that demand a completely new mode of being from the person. But of course, I just wanted to use that story to emphasize that this happens on a smaller level as well. So take the example from when I stepped into this new identity as a life coach, take it as an example that it can't happen on a small scale, and just notice, you go through this cycle of catalyst, insight, backlash, and reintegration all the time. Just start noticing it and really accepting that mechanism, because it's happening all the time, every single day within you. And so I also want to talk about collective dark night of the soul, because the dark night of the soul, it manifests in the individual as the conflict between two or more aspects of the psyche. You have one aspect of the new, more authentic identity, while the other is the older, prior identity that is no longer in alignment with the new identity. So it's like a battle between those two aspects of the psyche, but the same mechanism holds true on a collective or societal level between groups of different worldviews. To provide an example, think about the Civil War that occurred in the 1860s in the United States, a very defining time of the country. And at this time, there's a growing awareness in the collective that slavery was immoral and that it should be abolished. That was the awakening, you can say. It was easy for the northern states to accept this, but very difficult for the southern states to accept this because their economy depended upon slavery for its survival. And so the two sides became more and more polarized, and eventually the tension rose to the point that a war broke out. And at this point, now the human collective psyche was in battle. And after a few years of fighting, the North wound up victorious over the South, which led to the abolition of slavery nationwide. However, the Southern economy was completely broken and completely decimated. They were now in a dark night of the soul because they had relied on slavery for so long. And to help the South out of their dark night of the soul, Congress implemented a series of acts and policies which came to be known as the Reconstruction, so that the South would be better able to function in this post-slavery reality. That was the reintegration. Of course, this Reconstruction era didn't solve all problems, racism was still rampant, but nonetheless, it was a significant move towards wholeness and unity within the human collective. And my point in sharing this historical story is that, to the ultimate reality, there's no difference between the battle that plays out in one's individual mind between conflicting self-identities and the battle that plays out in the collective mind between conflicting group identities. What's happening is that consciousness is beckoning forth an expansion, a move towards greater unity, wholeness, and love. Are you going to accept this expansion, or are you going to deny it? Will you choose love, or will you choose fear? Your individual response to these questions are going to determine the entire course of your life and the degree to which you awaken in this lifetime. And our collective response to these questions will determine the entire course of humanity's future and the degree to which our species awakens. Your heart knows the answer, your heart knows the way, but again, your attachment to ego is not so quick to choose it. Good luck to you. So that's all I got for the main topic today, guys, but I do have a few last words that may interest you. The first one is that I started an online community called the Soulful Synergy Sanctuary, where people on the path of self-actualization and spiritual growth can come together, share resources, and every week we do a weekly call where a question is asked. We go into breakout rooms and we talk and we meet each other and we vibe, and it's completely free. So just click the link in the description. It's been a very good way to vibe and meet people so far. The synergy has been insane. I find that everyone's on the same wavelength, everyone's on the same path. But in addition to this, I do also offer coaching as well. I do an 8 to 10 week program that is designed to skyrocket your awareness, increase your self-understanding, and ultimately catalyze your life purpose so that, this life is the most precious thing, right? And you want to make sure you're doing the right thing and do what you're meant to do. Find your authentic calling. So that's what my coaching helps with. If that interests you, head to the coaching tab of my website. The link will be in the description for that. That is all I have for today, guys. Have a great day and peace.